Hi everybody, I'm Mrs Potts from the Net English Director team and welcome to this walkthrough on paper 2 question 4. This question is all about comparing viewpoints. It's worth 16 marks and we recommend that you spend 20 minutes writing your answer. So let's start with an overview of paper 2 question 4. So this is what the question will look like. It will direct you to referring to the whole of source A together with the whole of source B. So there are no line restrictions. And your question will always start with compare how the writers convey their different perspectives on the extreme weather conditions. In your answer, you could compare their different perspectives on the extreme weather conditions, compare the methods the writers use to convey their different perspectives, and support your response with references to both texts. Now, this question tests you on 3 skills. It's a hard question, and because of that, it is the lowest performing question nationally. However, I firmly believe that there is quite an easy structure and layered approach to take when answering this question. The first thing that you've got to be able to do for this question is to identify the writer's viewpoints, what they think and feel about a topic. You then have to explain what methods, language and/or structure writers use to show their viewpoint. Finally, you have to compare the viewpoints of the writers, and normally it is the differences. When answering this question, use the peel structure. Start with source A and then make sure that you link it to source B. And the key to success in this question is to constantly show the examiner that you are focusing on the writer's viewpoints. So what the writer in source A thinks in comparison to what the writer in source B thinks. Like with every question, we do have a suggested structure for this, and it is the peel paragraph. So please check out page 38 in your recipe book and onwards for a more detailed version. So start with a viewpoint from source A. So for example, in source A, the writer believes that the adverse weather conditions are dangerous. Provide good evidence from source A, and remember, good quotations equals good paragraphs. If you choose a rubbish quotation, your explanation will be rubbish. So it's really important that you choose a quotation that you can write a lot about. Once you've chosen your quotation, zoom in on keywords, unpack meaning, but then link to the writer's viewpoint. And I've included a cropped image from the English language recipe book where you could, in theory, zoom in on a word phrase or on a metaphor or a simile, and when you're explaining it, show that you're linking it to the appropriate perspectives shown on the right. So a particular metaphor might show an aggressive tone. It might show that the writer is puzzled and is uncertain, or it might show that they are interested and they actually feel powerful. In the link, you then talk about a difference. So how is the viewpoint different in source B? And what you often have, guys, is you have one source which has got a more positive viewpoint and one that's got a more negative. So what you've got on this slide is a model answer to paper 2 question 4 using our peel structure. What I've also done is I've colour coded the different elements to match the peel structure so you can identify those easily. Now, the second thing that you should notice is that there are particular words or phrases that I've highlighted in bold and in purple. So words such as believes, positive opinion, thinks, understands, desperate, appreciates, enjoys, believes, positive opinion. And the reason why I've drawn your attention to those words is because those are our magic words that show the examiner that I am answering this question and I am focusing on viewpoints. Part of the reason why this is the lowest performing reading question in English language is because pupils don't often refer to the viewpoints of the writer and they don't zoom in on keywords and phrases. So please pause the video and just take the time to read through that model answer. Make sure you understand why something is the point, why something is the explanation, why something's the link. And finally, please be aware that the link is as detailed as the explanation, if not a little bit more detailed. So please pause the video and take the time to read through that model answer. So this question is worth 16 marks. You should know that we always round up to the nearest 5. So 16 marks equals 20 minutes writing time. From a timing perspective, if the exam started at 9 a.m. in the morning, at 9:40 you should be on this question, because you've got to make sure that you have a full 20 minutes writing time on it, because it is worth 16 marks. It's the highest scoring reading question in paper 2, and we can't sacrifice timing on this question because there are 3 skills that you must do. The first thing is that you must identify and explain what a writer is thinking and or feeling. The second thing that you do is you've got to explain what methods a writer uses. In my experience, I find that pupils normally tend to explain language and do that pretty well, but you can bring in structure if you like. And thirdly, you've got to compare the viewpoints of 2 writers. The reason why I've colour-coded those in red, lighter green and darker green is to reflect the peel paragraph structure. So if you need to rewind the video, please feel free to do so. So let's work the question. Take a moment to pause the audio and read this question carefully once again. Thank you for doing that. So the first step is that next to how, make sure that you write zoom times 2 to ensure that you do unpack writers' methods. Like I said previously, this is the most low performing reading question in English language, and one of the reasons why is because pupils do not unpack writers' methods. They don't explain particular language features, they don't zoom in on keywords, and it's how is always the second word in the second sentence, so make sure that we always do that. The second step is to highlight perspective or similar word. Now it might be perspective, it might be idea, it might be attitude, it might be thoughts. They are all synonyms, they mean the same thing. This question is asking you to identify, explain and compare what writers think or feel. And I'm going to introduce you to a set of magic words. So, around perspectives or similar word, I would encourage you to recall the following: think, understand, feel, realise, appreciate, worry about, blames and believes. And if you recall those magic words, when you are writing up your answer, you must ensure that you include at least one of those magic words in every element of your peel paragraph. And what that will mean is that the examiner has got to give you marks because you're answering the question. You're focusing on the viewpoints. And thirdly, consider our common conceptual ideas. So things such as power or conflict. There will be a writer who feels powerful or powerless. There will be a writer who realises that there's a conflict between 2 people, or who appreciates that there's a conflict between the power of nature and the insignificance of mankind. Also, just a reminder guys, please check out pages 38 to 41 in your recipe book for further supporting materials. Now when you come on to answering this question, please remember that by this point you will have already read the 2 sources for question 1 to 3. I also want to take this opportunity to remind you or enlighten you that you can repeat quotations. If you've exploded a quotation for language analysis in question 3, you can reuse that quotation, but just make sure that you link it to the writer's viewpoint for this question. So, before you can start writing your answer, you will have to take some time to track the texts again. So, I'm going to model how to do this on the first part of Saucy, which you will see on the screen. Please, before we start doing this activity, take the time to pause it to read from lines 1 to 25, and to, as you're reading it, think about, well, what does that tell us about what the writer thinks or feels about the adverse weather conditions, the focus of the question. Okay, so let's go through this together. So from the first line, base camp is a cheerless place at the best of times, but once the sun is dipped beneath the surrounding ridges, it is like living in a freezer. So we've got a lovely simile there, and straight away it shows us that the writer understands that the base camp at Mount Everest is determined by weather. It is a cold place. Shivering with the cold, Solked left the mess tent and walked across the ice of the Khumbu Glacier towards her tent to find some extra clothing. A writer will never say, explicitly, I think or I believe. You've got to read the text and you've got to work out what the writer thinks, feels, realises, understands, worries about. Glancing into the sky to the south, she became one of the first people, and probably the very first, to see what was sweeping up from the lower valleys of the Himalayas towards Everest. It was a sight which fixed her to the spot, all thoughts of seeking out a few more layers of clothing momentarily forgotten. That phrase there in line 7, fixed her to the spot. So already at this moment, Dickinson, the writer, understands that this weather has got some power over the campers at base camp. Now she's fixed to the spot because she's scared. Does this writer share her fear? Yes, I think he does. Sudden squalls are common in the afternoon on Everest, but Solked had never seen anything like this before. She later described it as looking like a tyre dump fire, great billowing lilac clouds racing up from the south. She called out other members of the team from our tents, and they stood watching in awe as the apocalyptic vision crept silently and swiftly towards them. Now that phrase, the apocalyptic vision, zooming in on the adjective apocalyptic, it's obviously got connotations of the end of the world, and that shows us that this writer is starting to worry. This is a storm. This is an experience that's coming on base camp that they have never seen before, which hints at the fact that they are going to feel unprepared and inferior to the storm. At speeds touching 80 to 100 kilometres an hour, the storm whipped into the camp just minutes later, plunging the temperature down by 10 to 15 degrees in as many seconds. And it's in this paragraph that we can see that the writer realises the true power and danger of this storm. If we look at the verbs whipped, plunging and ripping, he is completely aware that this storm is dangerous and it could have negative connotations and consequences. Also, the time phrase, just minutes and many seconds, is showing us that he knows that this storm is intensifying in a very quick manner, and if they have got any chance of survival, they are going to also have to act quickly. If Shiva, the Hindu god of destruction, and Nemesis, the Greek goddess of retribution, had joined forces, they could not have done a better job of devastation than nature itself did on that day. Now, referring to two gods shows us that this writer understands the true power of this storm, and by comparing them to a god of destruction and a goddess of retribution, is he hinting at the fact that we need to be reminded as humans that nature is more powerful than us. At now like you to pause the video, and I'd like you to read the remaining lines of this source independently, and I would like you to think about what you can tease out, what meanings, what thoughts and feelings you can tease out from the writer of this source. So does he continue thinking negatively about this storm? What does he worry about by the end? Does he appreciate anything? And remember to use those magic words and check out your recipe book if you need some more support. So just to quickly go through what I would have picked out is the first line of this. We immediately knew that this was something far more dangerous than any other storm. He is really worried at this moment, and he's actually worried for the first time about survival. The previous section of the extract referred to the tents being destroyed, but now he's referring to the temperature falling below freezing. And it reminds us how at the start of the extract, he was aware that the conditions at base camp were difficult anyway, but now they are even more difficult, and he is worried whether him and his colleagues will get out of this alive. The way that the writer describes the wind, a constant bullying force, showing that he appreciates the brute force of this storm, and he is completely aware that as an individual, he is completely insignificant to it. The reference to the guy ropes and the dome tents being destroyed also shows that he thinks everything that has got some link to man is being easily destroyed, and there is no obstacle in this storm's path. He then refers to the snow as a white wall of snow, showing us that at this moment he feels that he is surrounded by this snow and there's no escape. And then in the final two paragraphs, he refers to 30 climbers were fighting for their lives, and it shows us clearly that he is worried about people surviving this adverse storm that they weren't expecting. In the final paragraph, he refers to this night as the night from hell, illustrating that this is the worst night as a climber that he has ever experienced. And the mention of 3 Indian climbers on the north side and 5 of the climbers on the south side were dead shows us that he is grieving for a loss of life, and at the same time he's appreciating the complete power of nature, but he's mourning the loss that he's experienced. So we've read source A and we've tracked each line. If you take a moment, please pause the audio and just read the first part of source B from line 1 to 20. Off you go. So we've read source A, we've tracked each line, and we've identified Matt Dickinson's, he's the writer of that source. We've identified Dickinson's thoughts and feelings. We now need to switch to source B. And now remember, we are looking for different viewpoints here. So let's have a look at the first paragraph. Wednesday, 2nd of January. Since midnight, snow had silently fallen to the depth of 6 to 8 inches. So straight away the description, and in particular that verb phrase, silently fallen, this writer has got a very different tone when he is describing the snow. By breakfast time it was all over except a slight flaky dropping, and the day was calm and very cold. Nothing could be more beautiful, and we've got a very strong opinion there. So this writer, Arthur Munby, believes that the snow is actually something incredibly positive, and he's not appreciating the power of nature like the writer in source A, but he's appreciating the beauty. No change more complete and charming. The adjective charming shows us that this snowfall has almost whisked him away into another world, and he's enjoying it. The trees around the fountain near Garden Court were loaded with snow, an exquisite tracery of white branches. Again, that noun phrase, that exquisite tracery, he's talking about the beauty and the intricate patterns that snow can create on a city landscape. But in the streets, the transformation was greatest. All traffic except a foot was stopped. No cabs, no omnibuses, no wagons. The snow lay in heaps in the road. Men were scraping and shovelling the footways, and people in thick coats and wrappers stepped noiselessly along. So at this point, this writer thinks that the snow has had a positive impact on London because it's been a great transformation. There's no traffic. So all of the hustle and bustle and the pollution has stopped. Now he refers to people in thick coats and wrappers and people shoveling the footpaths. But at this moment, he is not worried about anything. He is enjoying this scene, and it's completely different to the writer in source A. Here in the heart of London and at midday, there was an absolute cleanliness and brightness, absolute silence. So again, we've got these positive phrases, the positive nouns of cleanliness, brightness and silence. All he can appreciate at this moment is the positive change and how it makes London seem like this clean and pure city, whereas previously it's normally filled with traffic and pollution and chaos and dirt and cloudy fog. But he describes it as loveliness. Line 14, I walked along enjoying the wondrous lovely scene. It's almost as if he thinks he's in a Christmas card scene here. He's walking down the street and he's taking everything that he can see. He sees the long perspective of houses, all grown picturesque and antique, their gable roofs white against a clear sky, and every overhanging joint and beam in their outline picked out in brilliant white. So again, that positive imagery of the white, really contrasting with the way that the writer describes the snow, the white wall of snow in source A. And he describes London as a quaint, still London of old, and it's at this point he thinks that this snowfall has almost taken him back in time, a time where London was quieter, where life was easier, and where he could wander down the streets and just enjoy the beauty of the natural world. So now that we've tracked source B together, I'd now like another pause moment. So pause the audio, pause the video, and please read the remaining section of this extract. So remember, we are looking for differences, and what you need to do is track every single line, and can you tease out a viewpoint? What does Arthur Munby think or feel about this snow? Does he change his mind a little bit? Does he still think it's as positive and as beautiful as he did at the start? Check it out. And let's quickly just pick out a few things from the second part of source B. So, in the first paragraph that's on this slide, he refers to a girl of 17 or so in ragged but warm shawl and a bit of an old bonnet, whose dark rough hair was covered with snow and hung in a tangled white mass. Now this is the first instance where we've seen Arthur Munby describe a negative consequence of this snow. But at this moment he's not worried. He's not worried that she's cold, because he describes her shawl as warm. And she's stamping and blowing on her fingers to keep warm. At this moment, he appreciates that she's a little bit colder than usual, but she's all right. He's not worried about people dying like the writer in source A. And then we come on to Friday the 4th of January. So 2 days later. And for the first time, he doesn't describe the snow using a positive adjective. The cold out of doors at 10 this morning was more intense. So it's more serious. To my apprehension. Now he's a bit apprehensive here. He's not as confident as he was. His beard freezes and his heart seemed paralysed. So we do have an evolving viewpoint because he's now experiencing some negative things. He's realising that, yeah, the snow was beautiful 2 days ago, but it's more intense now, and he's got a headache. So by the end of the short walk, he goes home because he feels helpless. So at the start, he was appreciating this beauty, but now he's realised some negative consequences of this weather. But it's still different from source A. He's got a headache and his beard has frozen. It's very different to worrying about climbers who are dying. And in the final paragraph, he walks to call on to his friends, the Thackeray's. And he walks past a girl in Victoria Street, a ragged tall girl of 19, who has no home, who slept last night on a step in a sheltered corner and felt as cold as a frog, she said. Now he's realising here that although he might have not been massively affected by this snow, less privileged people may have been. So this young girl who's homeless is as cold as a frog, and actually is he realising here that there are more negative consequences of the weather as he initially thought. So now that we've read through it, I'd like us to write up an answer together. So we start with a point from source A and we start with a viewpoint. So this is the viewpoint that I have created. In source A, the writer realises that the adverse weather conditions are life-threatening and understands the climbers are powerless in comparison to the power of nature. Notice how I have used 2 of our magic words to show the examiner that I am focusing on what the writer thinks. My points actually got 2 viewpoints in there, which makes it more developed. And I've also referred to the power of nature, a conceptual idea. I've then backed it up with some good evidence. Now remember, you've got to choose a quotation that you can write a lot about. You don't want to choose a quotation that you can only say one thing about, because a rubbish quotation equals a rubbish paragraph. So Dickinson uses negative imagery to describe the effects of the storm, so straight away I'm referring to a method there, and I'm referring to a language feature, negative imagery. And then I've included the quotation. The storm whipped into the camp just minutes later, plunging the temperature down, ripping into the tents. And notice how I've utilised the ellipsis. There is part of that quotation that I've got no intention of unpacking. So instead of wasting time and writing it out, I'm replacing it with my ellipsis. So let's see how I build up an explanation. The first thing I want you to notice is that in my explanation I have used 4 more magic words again, which shows the examiner that even though I am zooming in on keywords and unpacking meaning, I am constantly linking to what the writer thinks or feels. So the first thing that I'm going to zoom in on is the metaphoric verb whipped. So I'm zooming in on that verb and I'm linking it to what the writer believes. So the metaphoric verb whipped shows that the writer believes that this apocalyptic vision almost appears to be a punishment from a higher power. Notice how I've referred to another quotation and I've embedded that into my explanation. I'm going to get extra marks for that. Furthermore, that connective shows the examiner that I am going to be given more detail here. I'm not finished my explanation. I've got more to say because I've chosen a good quotation. Furthermore, paired with the verbs plunging and ripping, also shows that the writer understands that the storm is all-consuming and there is no protection from its consequences. The reference to the tents illustrates he is worried about the safety of his team, as he realises the tents that are supposed to offer protection against the elements are utterly destroyed and irreparable. So I have got a detailed, clear explanation there. It is obvious that I understand these texts and I can explain the viewpoints in my own words. And let's see how I create a link. So the first thing, because this question is asking for different viewpoints, is I start with a connective to show a difference. So I've started with however. So however, the writer in source B is not worried about the lives of people. Now the reason why I've started with that is because if you have a look at my explanation, one of the last things I've said about the writer in source A is that he is worried. So by referring to that in my link, I am showing the examiner I have got a clear difference. So the writer in source A is worried about the safety of his team. However, the writer in source B is not worried about the lives of people. Instead of appreciating the brute force of nature, Munby appreciates the beauty of the London snow. And already I have used 3 of those magic words. You will see that they are peppered throughout my pale paragraph. And that's why I would make sure that before I even attempt to write up my answer, I've got them noted down and I would tick off the ones that I've used. Instead of using powerful verbs like Dickinson, so again I'm comparing, Munby uses positive imagery to describe the adverse weather conditions. Here in the heart of London and at midday there was absolute cleanliness and brightness, absolute silence. The noun phrase absolute cleanliness and brightness shows that Munby thinks the snow has transformed London in a positive way and is enjoying the tranquil transformation. I've clearly explained Munby's perspective there, but then at the end I'm going to cross-reference back. Unlike Dickinson, who was worried for people's lives, so I'm showing the examiner that I completely understand how these viewpoints are different. Furthermore, I'm using that discourse marker again. The nouns cleanliness and brightness also have connotations of purity, showcasing Munby's belief that this is almost a godly gift, which contrasts to the wrath of nature shown in source A. So again, I'm ending with a difference. That would be an ideal detailed peel. You can see the link is as detailed as the explanation. And whenever you come to do this question and practice this question at home, I would bookmark this video, in particular this moment, and be thinking, right, that's a model answer. I am going to try and replicate that. So that's the end of the walkthrough for paper 2 question 4. But what can you be doing independently to improve your responses for this question? Task 1. Quickly recall the magic words from memory. Task 2. Make a mind map of possible thoughts and feelings. Consider similar and opposing thoughts and feelings that a writer might have. And again, please use your recipe book for this. Task 3. Complete some quotation explosions from source A and source B. Rewind this video, pause them on the different sources, copy out your quotations that you think show a viewpoint, and explode them. Zoom in on keywords and phrases. What do certain language features or phrases or words tell you what the writer is thinking? Task 4. Draft some example peels answering the question. Use mine as a model, but then think about how the writer in source A at the end is really worried about people dying, whereas the writer in source B is worried about his beard freezing and getting a headache. And task 5, apply this walkthrough to texts in your CPG revision guides, past papers, or even newspaper articles. So for example, if you can find a relevant newspaper article on anything that's going on in the current day, what does the writer think about it? Can you identify what the writer thinks about it? Thank you very much for watching this short walkthrough on paper 2 question 4, comparing viewpoints. I'm Mrs. Potts. I really hope that you found that useful. Any work that you do produce, please make sure that you pass on to your English teacher, the head of English, or the English director based in your scale. Thank you.